Okay, tonight we are covering chapter 13, which is all about at-risk students. So we'll talk about early intervention and early identification. And then we'll talk for just a minute at the end about a couple of other assignments that we have before the end of the semester, because we're kind of closing in on the end. So at-risk students, chapter 13. So what is the history of at-risk conditions? Well, we first started to sort of understand this population in the 1960s. Before that, everybody just sort of sink or swim. And in the 1960s, we began to understand the importance of environment on the development of humans. And in 1965, we had the first Head Start programs that began. We got federal funding for Head Start, and it started out as a program for 4-year-olds to have a public school opportunity. And like I said, that began in 1965. Children had to qualify for Head Start based upon low socioeconomic status, or low SES. And later, much later, in fact, just a few years ago, and I can't remember an exact date right now, but it's been in the last, I would say 5 years or so. Some of my child and family studies people might know the answer to this right off the top of your heads, but 3-year-olds were added to that list of Head Start kiddos who can benefit from that. It may be more than 5 years now, but it's been in my recent memory that 3-year-olds have been added to the Head Start roles, and they can also benefit from that. For a while, you could have 3-year-olds come to Head Start, I think, for a small fee, but then it was decided that all 3-year-olds could come to Head Start. We've also had paid pre-K. Oh, there it says it right there. 1994, Early Head Start was created. Oh, it doesn't seem like that long ago. I think that maybe I'm thinking of something else then. Maybe I'm thinking of free pre-K for all. That's been in the last few years. But 1994, that seems like a long time ago. The 1980s, the term at-risk was used in educational policy at the federal level and in programs for the first time. And then, like it says here on the slide, which I didn't even see a minute ago, 1994 was an early Head Start began, and that would be for our 3-year-olds, but that seems like a really long time ago. So that's like 30 years almost. So it's been in just the last few years that there have been changes to this program, I know. And I think it was just in the last legislative session that universal 4-year-old programs have been included for all children, regardless of SES. And I don't know if that's just in Texas or if that's across the nation, but that's just some anecdotal information I remember from hearing that on the news recently, that those kind of programs are beginning to take hold all over the place, where communities and community leaders understand the importance of these kinds of things, and so they're offering it with funding behind it for the first time for all kids, because there's always been that gap of the very poor have been included, and then there's been those people who could pay for those programs, and then there's that big bunch of people in the middle who were not poor enough to qualify for some of those programs, but not wealthy enough to pay for their children to access some of the programs that had a fee attached to them. But we finally understand that all children benefit from some of those early educational opportunities. So what is the definition of at-risk? Well, that's an individual under the age of 3 who would be likely to experience a substantial developmental delay if early intervention is not provided. So if we don't intervene at an early point in time in that child's life, they are likely to experience some sort of developmental delay. So preschoolers aged 3 to 5 who are entitled to special education services, if they have developmental delays in physical, cognitive, communication, social, emotional, or adaptive development, can also be considered at risk. So IDEA, which we've talked about all semester, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that's our education federal law for students with disabilities. And it's divided into several parts. And Part C of that law is designated for infants and toddlers. And it has served more than, this data is pretty old, but in 2005, it served more than 250,000. So we can increase that over the course of time. Part B, which is the 3 through 5 year olds, served over 700,000 children. In our early childhood population. So what are some conditions of established risk? Well, there are all kinds, and we've talked about a lot of them in reference to other disabilities this semester, but chromosomal disorders, chromosomal abnormalities would be one. The one that comes to mind for most of us first is Down syndrome, which is a overproduction of one of the chromosomes. Other genetic kinds of disorders, severe sensory impairment. One of the senses has a neurological kind of impairment there. So that could be vision, hearing, tactile kinds of things that are impaired. Metabolic disorders, disturbed nervous system development, fetal alcohol disruptions or syndromes, and severe attachment disorders, children who don't connect appropriately with their parent or guardian. And these are just a few of the conditions that can cause at-risk situations. So how about some medical or biological reasons for risk? A low birth weight, very, very low birth weight. I have a former student who was actually in this class maybe 4 or 5 years ago, who just became a mom in the last few months. I think I may have even mentioned her earlier this semester. She's a teacher now and is married and gave birth to a 2-pound baby. Actually, is that right? No, baby was smaller than that. 1 pound something. I'll have to go back and look and see how big her baby was, but tiny, tiny little baby. And she's just come home from the hospital, the baby has, at 5 months of age. She's just come home. She's still on oxygen and is just tiny. But certainly that baby, who has spent the first 5 months of her life and was born at just, a very, very low birth weight. I think she was born at, I think it was 21 weeks gestation, which is just practically unheard of to be born so early in the pregnancy. Some states still allow abortion at that stage of pregnancy, which is, it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around that. You can still abort a baby at the age at which this baby was born and lived. That's a hard one to kind of wrap your mind around. And I'm not going on either side of that abortion debate, but just think about that one for a little bit. This baby was able to live outside the mother's womb with lots of medical supports, but is now 5 months after its birth and is alive. Intraventricular hemorrhage at birth. So blood disorders, bleeding as part of the birth process can be very damaging to the infant and causes lots of medical risks later on. Chronic lung disease, other heart kinds of issues, babies who have heart problems at birth have to have elaborate surgeries Those kinds of medical risks can cause lots of issues later on. And this last one on the list, you may have heard of. When we say it's a very general kind of label to put on a baby, but we just kind of call it failure to thrive. And that's when a baby just doesn't grow at the rate that we would expect. They don't hit those milestones that we would expect them to hit at the appropriate times. And so they fall into this category as well as being a biological or medical risk for issues and problems. So conditions of environmental risk. Now, this list is quite long, and it's to me the really sad one because it's preventable. Parental substance abuse, family instability, poverty, not always preventable there, homelessness, violence in the home, teen pregnancy, child abuse and neglect, factors related to school, maybe the schooling of the parent, English as a second language. All of these kinds of things sometimes provide additional environmental risks on top of maybe some of the other things that are going on, developmental things, chromosomal things, medical or biological things that are happening. And you add some of these factors in, and it can combine to make a very problematic situation. If the language that's spoken in the home is not the one that's offered in the community, perhaps services are not accessed when they could be or should be, and that can be a barrier to care. So some protective factors. What can we do that can help children develop resiliency to overcome risk factors? These include the child's temperament. Sometimes if a child is just very strong-willed, that can be a real help in the child's favor. High self-esteem, what we call school competence. If the child has a knack for learning and for being in the school environment, sometimes that can really bolster their chances of overcoming at-risk conditions. Good emotional relationships with at least one parent, and some perceived social support. If they believe that they have teachers that care, maybe another adult, family members that care, a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle, a favorite friend in the community that they feel supported by. All of these things can help the child overcome some of these issues. Some more protective factors that protect a child from abuse and neglect. Good health. Above average intelligence is always a plus factor. That can help children overcome all kinds of things if they're savvy enough to make their way around some of the barriers that they may have in their life in other realms. Hobbies or interests that grip them and help them to make the most of their environment. Good peer relationships, an easy temperament, just easygoing, not easily bothered by their surroundings, by conflict with other people, a positive disposition, very active coping skills, at least having an arsenal of coping skills, positive self-esteem, good social skills, an internal locus, that should say locus of control. That's where they know that they're in charge of part of their life, rather than feeling like they have no control, feeling like they've got some control over their destiny. That helps in this objective that we have for getting kids past some of these at-risk conditions. And a balance between seeking help and autonomy. We don't want kids that just play the victim all the time and that see themselves as victims. We want to know that kids feel like they are overcomers, but do find that balance between being too independent and not independent enough. They know when they need help and know how to seek it and find it. So how many infants and toddlers are identified as at risk? Well, many different identification techniques and criteria are used throughout the states across the the United States. Differences in chronological age and actual performance level can be expressed as a percentage. And so their developmental age over their chronological age. We can look at performance at a specified number of months or a standard deviation below their age mean. There are lots of different ways of looking at it. Sometimes we use developmental assessments. There's one called the Battelle Developmental Inventory. It's in its second edition, and it assesses physical, communicative, cognitive, social, or emotional and adaptive skills. And we assess the child in a clinical setting to determine how they line up in comparison to their peers in these areas that you see on the screen. So how are those at risk identified in early childhood? Sometimes it can be a little tricky with very young children. Well, we give individually administered early screening assessments. We might use a behavioral measure, and we'll look at things like noncompliance or antisocial behavior patterns. We can tell a lot by how cooperative children may be, how much of that antisocial behavior they actually demonstrate. We can do a lot of that through observation in a classroom setting while they play with other children. So some of that is play-based assessment, looking at cooperative learning situations, and see how they manage their behavior with other children. We'll look at early reading skills, such as letter naming, letter sound knowledge, their vocabulary, and their fluency. I may have mentioned this earlier this semester, but the greatest indicator of overall intelligence is vocabulary. And so the way I tell at first glance, a person's overall intelligence is by their vocabulary. So if I were to sit with any of you for a few minutes, I would be able to get a pretty good indicator of your overall intelligence based upon the vocabulary that you use and the way that you use vocabulary. Do you use it correctly? What level of vocabulary do you choose to use in conversation? And that's a clear indicator of overall intelligence. And the same is true with young children. Now, it's not the only indicator of intelligence, so don't get too nervous about that. And if a young child is not talking at a particular age, that doesn't mean they have an intellectual disability. Maybe they're not to the level yet where they're using a lot of vocabulary. So we wait till their maturation is there, and then we listen to their vocabulary. And we also look at the fluency of their language. Does it have a flow? And we look at that as well. DIBELS is a reading screener that identifies students at risk for reading failure, and it's very commonly used in schools today. The kindergarten teacher will often do a DIBELS screener to identify students who might be at risk for failure in reading in the future. We have something called the Early Reading Diagnostic Assessment. It evaluates all 5 essential components of reading. We have pre-reading inventories. There's one called the Pre-Reading Inventory of Phonological Awareness. And that's if a child can, make rhymes, if they know some of those initial consonant sounds, can they break words into syllables? Do they understand alliteration? The lucky leopard, both start with L, that kind of thing. Sound isolation, breaking words into individual sounds and separating words like that. Other kinds of phonetic exercises. So what should children who are at risk be taught? Well, we certainly want to teach them the general education content that we would teach anybody else at their developmental level. But we also want to give them enriched language and literacy skills, because sometimes kids who are at risk aren't getting a lot of that at home. So we want to give lots of opportunity for them to, for particularly young children, to hear lots of oral reading, lots of new and fresh vocabulary, give them opportunities to write. For young children, lots and lots of this language loading. And as children get older, we want to give them opportunities to express themselves in writing and to read a lot independently. Yeah, we want to give them as many math skills as we can. The next one is we want to do this as much as we would with typical kids, and then some. We want to teach them social and behavioral control, because sometimes this is also missing in the home setting, particularly if those at-risk factors are coming from the environmental side of things. Perhaps the social and behavioral realm is being neglected altogether. And so we want to give kids an opportunity to have some accountability in these areas and actually have some of these skills be taught in a very concrete way. We also want to teach family involvement, and sometimes it's just a matter of instructing parents in what their role needs to be. Sometimes we're dealing with extended families, and sometimes it's that extended family that's actually caring for the child. And so we want to reach out and make everyone feel like they're a part of the solution, and teach them sometimes the skills that they need to have in order to be part of the fix for the child. The acronym that you see there at the bottom of this slide, IFSP, this is what we call a plan for a child who is under the age of 3. An IEP, an individual education plan, is what we have for children who are over the age of 3 in the school system already through special education. And an IFSP is what we have for children who are under 3. And I think this may be a question on your next test, so make a note of this. It's an individual family service plan. And under the age of 3, we're involving everybody, not just the child in our goals, but the family. And so it's a family service plan. We're going to include the whole family in the plan that we're building for this child, because we certainly can't teach in isolation to just the student at these very young levels. We want to include the parent, siblings, other people that may interact with the child throughout the day. So how should we teach children who are at risk? Well, probably the very best thing we can do is use a universal design approach for learning, or UDL, that allows students to acquire and demonstrate knowledge in lots of different ways. And this is really a great approach to teaching in general for all students, not just kids who are at risk or kids who have disabilities. But if we make learning accessible to all students, we don't have to change things up for the student who is at risk or for the student who has a disability. We just make learning accessible to all. And we let students express their learning in different ways. And so if we allow students to show their learning through a variety of means, then we don't get locked into one particular narrow avenue that only works for a small percentage of our class, or only for the brightest and best behaved students. We can have lots of ways to do it, and that's what we call universal design for learning, or UDL. And you'll see that in lots of places in the literature out there about the best ways to educate. And so do a little exploration about universal design for learning and see what you can find about that. We want to establish progressive levels of prevention so that we can get away from some of these at-risk factors as quickly as possible, and build those barriers around the child so that they are protected from some of these factors that bombard children who are born into at-risk situations. We want to plan for shared storybook reading and use positive behavior supports, give as much positivity to the child in the way of experiences and support as possible. So what is prevention? Well, prevention is an outcome of the process of intervention. And there are really three types of prevention. There's primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary being the first, and that's when we prevent harm. We don't let it happen to start with. The secondary type of prevention is where we reverse harm. It's already happened, but we're going to change it. We're going to change it back to a condition without the harm. And the third, tertiary, is where we reduce harm. We can't prevent it. It's too late. We can't reverse it. It's too late to even reverse it, but we can reduce it. And so you'll see in your careers, all three of these types of situations. Some where you see right off the bat that you can prevent harm. Others where you can only reverse the harm that's already been done. And situations too, where it's too far gone, you can't prevent it, you can't even reverse it, but you can help to reduce the harm. And we'll see this, the situations that come to my mind are situations of abuse and neglect that have already caused harm to children. And we can't prevent it. Maybe we can't even reverse it, but we can certainly reduce it by the way we treat the child at school, by the way we care for them, the supports that we provide for them, and the environment that we surround them with while they're at school. All of these include family involvement. We've got to make sure that the family is on the same page as the school and that we're all working together to provide that type of prevention for the child. They all require collaboration with others. So what considerations are there for the home environment? And particularly with young children, we've got to really work together with the family to put this in place, and as much with older children as we possibly can. All skills should be taught in natural environments. And so a lot of things can be taught in the school setting, but there are some things that we just have to teach in other settings so that we can make that transfer. So homes, parks, childcare centers, stores, etc. Other places in the community. And this is where field trips and other kinds of activities away from the school campus can be really rich places for student learning. Interaction should be consistently prompt, sensitive, responsive, and supportive. And we'll have children that we interact with who have been identified as at risk, who don't know the proper ways to behave in a school setting or in a community setting. And they need all of these kinds of things. They need sensitive, responsive, supportive interactions. And so we've got to really be watching and wary at all times for opportunities to have our interactions be each of these things. We want to help families arrange the home to encourage frequent interactions with responsive adults and a variety of play materials. The instructional environment should be organized, engaging. We should have developmentally appropriate practices, activities, and materials. We should provide a lot of scheduling for students and give them visual cues for that. So a visual schedule on the wall of the things that we're going to do throughout the day-to-day and help children see how we're progressing through that schedule. That can give order to a child's life that they may not have in any other way. So a visual schedule is really helpful. It's helpful to a lot of children with disabilities, but most children thrive on a schedule, and a visual schedule can be a real help for kids with intellectual disabilities, autism, traumatic brain injuries, and certainly kids who are at risk. The instructional environment should include rules, rituals, routines. All kids thrive on these, and it helps teach them expected behaviors and then helps them transfer those to other settings. So what type of instructional technology can be used? Well, some of the children, and we're seeing this less and less frequently. I was about to say some of the children that we see from at-risk situations don't have computers at home, but almost everybody these days has a smartphone, which is a little tiny computer. And so even babies who are coming from at-risk, environmentally at-risk situations know how to scroll through a smartphone. And you see them, watching Baby Shark or whatever the video of the day might be. No matter how at risk the situation might be for that child. And so computer time is not nearly as valuable as it might have been at one point, because everybody's got one. So sometimes things that are more hands-on may be the valuable asset that we have in the school setting. Internet access, most people do have that these days. I don't know too many people, even those in poverty, who don't have that, because your cell phone is your hotspot. Use computers for word processing as a research tool, problem solving, not just for drill and practice. So teach the child how to use that tool in lots of different ways. And some things that are considerations for general ed teachers. Well, you want to always collaborate with the special education teacher, parents, and other staff. You want to use the functional behavior assessment that we talked about when we were looking at the emotional and behavioral chapter, how we look at students who have these kinds of issues, and we examine their behavior and figure out what's motivating them to behave in a certain way, and then the consequences that are best suited for the function of that behavior. Put some positive behavior supports in place. Give direct instruction that's very explicit. Provide social skills instruction. We talked about that during that same chapter. And applied behavior analysis techniques, and we talked about that during the autism chapter. Provide extra exposure to books, like I said a minute ago, as many opportunities for story time and reading, shared reading experiences that you can afford. Increase that engaged learning time, less time in independent learning and more time in engaged learning time, and provide lots and lots of language experiences. And that's it for our PowerPoint. So now I want to take just a second and let's see. I wanted to look at our assignments on, there it is, our assignments on Canvas for just a second. So I think I'm going to share my screen again. And let's see. Nope, that's not it. Here we go. Hang on. So share screen. Okay. Now, we're on Unit 4 right now. And Chapter 13. We've got 14. We're going to roll 14 and 15 into one reflection. And then we have a gender issues assignment, and then Unit 4 application activity. And then the only other thing we're lacking is our instructional materials project. And it's already open. And it looks like this. This is where you develop a non-reproducible instructional activity or game, something that's not a paper pencil activity or worksheet that you can use with a student in your field experience and or your future classroom. It can be a folder game or other type of activity, and you've got lots of choices. You can look at these websites for examples. You can go to Pinterest. You can go to Teachers Pay Teachers. You can go to myfoldergames.com, myffgames.com for ideas. You don't have to use a game from these sites. They're simply resources that illustrate examples of what the assignment requires. And then you develop a PowerPoint or a Prezi or Google Slides of your project, game, or whatever you decide to do, and include the following. And I may change this up a little bit, exactly what I'm going to require. I think I may change this a tiny bit, exactly what I'm going to require. But the main point here is you're going to put this PowerPoint together, and you're also going to actually construct the activity. So construct the activity, and then you're going to do a video presentation. Now, when we have this class face-to-face, everybody brings their presentation into class, and we have presentations all day. But obviously, when we're online, we can't do it that way. So you're going to do your presentation in a video format for me and show me your actual activity. Now, where people get messed up with this is they think, oh, this is so easy. I just need to find a folder game or something and do a PowerPoint about it and then talk about that. No, you actually have to create the activity. I want you to actually do the activity with a child. That's the best way to do it. Now, and then I want you to talk about it some. But the main thing I want you to do is construct the activity and talk about how you can adapt that activity for kids who may have disabilities. So don't get into this just yet, because I think I'm going to change some of the things I expect you to do with it right here. Some of the things for points here, I'm going to change a little bit. But the main thing I want you to do is be thinking about the activity you want to put together. It doesn't have to be super elaborate, but I want you to, the main thing I want you to do is be creating the activity, and then think about how you can adapt that activity to a child who has a disability. And that's what you're going to talk about in your presentation. You're going to show me the activity. You're going to talk about how you created it, where you got the activity. And if you make it up all on your own, that's fine. Just say, I created this on my own, or I got it from Teachers Pay Teachers, or I observed my teacher in my observation using this activity, or whatever works. Or my mom is a teacher and I stole this idea from her, whatever works. And then show us the activity on the video, go through your PowerPoint slides, and that's the presentation, okay? But that's 150 points, which is more than any of our tests. If you don't do this activity, you will probably fail the class. If you don't do it well, you may fail the class. So you've got to do the activity, and you need to do it well. And if you do it well and you're going to be a teacher, then it's an activity that you can use later on with your actual class. So put a little bit of effort into it and do it well. Like I said, I think I'm going to change up some of these points. So don't dive into this today, or you may do something that you don't need to do. So actually, I think I may unpublish it right now. And we'll come back to this, but now you kind of have an idea of what we're going to be doing with this activity in the last couple of weeks of the semester. Okay. So I've planted that seed, start thinking about it. And that's kind of the big wrap up. There'll be a unit 4 test, a unit 4 application activity about giftedness, which is chapter 15. And then we're going to wind up the semester. So we're winding down. Any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
How exactly do you want to submit our field placement?
The
'Cause I think
log or the reflections?
the log
The log.
or
You can,
both.
you can take
Exactly.
you can take a photo of your log. Have you been keeping the log?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you can take a photo of it and then submit it. If I haven't got a tab for it yet, I'll make one, okay? I'm not sure if, I don't think I have a tab for it yet, but I'll make a tab, okay? Let me make a note to myself to do that. Okay. You can take a photo of it or you can, scan it or whatever works like that, okay?
I also had a question. I know you said that we were gonna do the reflection over chapters 14 and 15 together,
Yeah,
but for this week, it says that 13 and 15 are due.
13 and 15. Well, 13 and 15 aren't due this week.
So it's just chapter 13 that's
It's
due
just
this week?
13. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And if it says 13 and 15, I need to go fix that. Thank you for telling me. Okay. Okay, so I need to make a place to submit your field placement documents. And I need to make some changes to this instructional materials project. What all you need to include on your PowerPoint, and what else did you, oh, and I need to fix chapters 13 and 15 on, so that 15 is not due yet. Okay, anything else? Good questions. All right, well, let's call it a night, girls. Okay. Thank y'all for tuning in.
Thank you.
I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.